So last time we went over delay time, which is delaying the input by a certain amount of time before sending it to the output. We also went over feedback, which is making a copy and sending it back into the delay input. And if the feedback volume is on full, it means it's not attenuating the signal every time it goes around the loop, which means we would just get a signal continuously looping over and over and over. What happens if we introduce new data into the feedback loop? To show what happens, I have a sine wave. I have a 100 hertz sine wave, which means a single cycle will take 10 milliseconds. And when I press a note, it will only play a single cycle of that sine wave. So I get to just launch single cycle sine waves into our feedback loop so we can look at what happens. Let's look at 20 milliseconds of time here. And we should see two peaks. Yep. So I launched a single cycle sine wave, which takes 10 milliseconds to complete. We know that our delay time is 10 milliseconds, but that output is being spit back into the input, which will then be delayed by 10 milliseconds without attenuation and sent again to the output. So we effectively have a sustained version of our sine wave. And now when I launch another sine wave, it will sum with this now free running sine wave at some random phase interval, which will give us either a boost or attenuation. In fact, it's going to be a 50-50 chance, right? So that was a boost. Let's change the input gain in the oscilloscope. That was another boost. Statistically, this should be an attenuation. That was about the same. That was an attenuation. That was about the same. That was an attenuation. Oh, another attenuation. A little bit of a boost. So on and so forth. We could do this all day. It's going to be 50-50 whether we gain or lose volume. But notice that we do have artifacts here. Now those artifacts come from this delay buffer. I'm not exactly sure about the particularities, but there's a number of reasons why. Like for instance, we know that our internal processing is occurring at 48 kilohertz. So I don't know if the samples that are being generated at 48 kilohertz, if those necessarily fit perfectly into a 10 millisecond window. Maybe they don't. Maybe that's why we're seeing some artifacts. Or maybe this delay time isn't using a lot of resources to make very fine calculations, and therefore it's a little bit off or something. Whatever the case is, know that this is introducing some artifacts. And because of that, I know that no matter how good of a phase cancellation I get, the artifacts will always remain. Like let's say that we have this repeating sine wave, because there's this little blip here. Even if I got another perfectly 180-degree sine wave, I would still be left with some data left over because of the artifacts. And that means that eventually, over time, that data will accumulate. And so no matter what I do, I will always be effectively gaining volume on average over time. And also to really prove this point of why this is integral here, let's put the sustain up on our amp envelope so I can launch, 100 sine waves per second through our delay time, which will stack those sine waves on top of each other at perfect phase intervals, and will then lose headroom really, really quick. So let's see what that looks like. Let's turn this down a little bit. Yep. So not only are we liable to gain information from artifacts, but anything that ends up being in phase, of course, is gonna stack. And yeah. If I do have feedback on negative feedback and I do hold a note, then yeah, technically that would more or less cancel, but still the artifacts will kind of create some data that will be left over no matter what. Let's talk about delay time again. If I have a signal that's captured, like a single cycle sine wave, and I change delay time, what this does is it actually stretches or compresses whatever data is in the loop Uh, think of this as like as sample data that's being time stretched. And so let's see what that looks like. Let's turn this up. So if I turn my delay time down, we're effectively going to be increasing the pitch. Actually, let's look at it through a spectrum analyzer, and I'll have to launch a sine wave again. And you can really see the artifacts manifest as overtones here. But yeah, let's turn it up. If I go up to 5 milliseconds, of course that will turn it up an octave. And if I go anything lower than 10, we'll go below what our original waveform is. Now you heard it get really buzzy there, and that's because when you're time stretching something, you are often, the computer makes a copy of data and repeats it over and over and over again, like almost like a granular synthesizer. A lot of time stretch algorithms use granular synthesis to add data to a sample that is trying to stretch out. So let's see what happens to the waveform structure when I increase the delay time. So we get these kind of repeats, this fractalization of the waveform. And rule of thumb is whenever you're increasing the delay time, you're bound to add a lot more artifacts than when you decrease the delay time, because it's easier to like compress a signal and like delete data than it is to add data that isn't there. I think that's all I really want to go over in this video. And then in the next one, I'll go over some more tricky stuff and then hopefully eventually get to a sound design thing. All right.